I remember the night with more clarity than I wish I did. A cousin's wedding in Manhattan, the ballroom sparkling with chandeliers and strings of champagne glasses clinking. People were laughing, the band was swelling with some old love song, and I was sitting at the edge of a round table, clutching a slim ivory envelope. Inside was the document that confirmed what the lawyer had told me 2 weeks before my grandfather's estate, valued at $2 million, now belonged solely to me. It should have been a night of celebration. Instead, it became the moment my marriage cracked open. As the father of the bride guided his daughter across the polished floor, I heard my husband lean toward Harper, an old friend of mine from college who had been seated too close for comfort. The music was loud, but his voice reached me all the same. "If I could do it again," he said with a low laugh, "I would still choose Daniel over her. Evelyn only has money, nothing else." The words stabbed sharper than any knife. My knuckles whitened around the envelope. For a second, I thought I might rise and throw my drink across the table. But the orchestra carried on, the guests, toasted, and no one seemed to notice that my world had just shifted. I forced a smile, nodded at someone across the room, and let the humiliation burn in silence. "Tell me, if your partner said this in public, what would you do? Leave me a comment. I want to know how others would have handled it." The ballroom remained bright, but inside me there was only stillness. I sat among people, yet felt alone, as though I were already a ghost in the room. My husband laughed easily, clinking glasses with Harper as if nothing had been said. Around us, the rest of the table chatted about travel plans and real estate prices. No one turned to notice the silence spreading across my face. I tried to breathe steady and calm, like nothing had happened. A mask settled over me, that same mask I had worn in other awkward dinners and forced gatherings. The performance was familiar: pretend, hold your posture, do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you flinch. It was the play of marriage, a family of appearances. But beneath the mask, anger pressed against my chest. A part of me screamed that I had been reduced to nothing but a number in a will, a vault to be raided. They laughed, glasses high. I remained invisible, my dignity dismissed in one careless sentence. "I will explain in a moment," I told myself quietly, "because this part matters." Tell me where you are watching from, and make sure you subscribe. We need to talk about families and money, and about how betrayal often hides behind a smile. After that night in the ballroom, I kept my silence. I did not confront him on the ride home, nor over the toast we shared in the kitchen the next morning. Instead, I began watching. Sometimes you learn more by listening than by speaking. Sometimes the smallest movements tell the story that words try to hide. Alex, my husband of 6 years, played the role of the attentive partner, as if nothing had ever been said. He poured coffee into my cup, asked about my lectures, even kissed my cheek before leaving for his office. Yet a layer of distance clung to him like a film on glass. I noticed the way he set his phone down, always face down, always within reach, the glow of the screen hidden from me. It was such a small change, but it grew louder in my mind each day. When we had first married, his phone lay carelessly on the counter, open for the world to see. I used to tease him about the flood of soccer updates and silly memes. Now each vibration seemed like a secret, each tilt of his wrist another reminder that I was no longer inside his world. What he did not know was that my mind had already begun collecting evidence. Not photographs, not recordings, but moments. The way his smile tightened when Daniel's name came up in old college stories. The sudden pause whenever Harper texted. The casual mention of a business dinner that left him returning late, his shirt faintly smelling of wine I had not poured. But what they didn't know was that I had sharper ears than they imagined. At a dinner with friends, I caught Alex in the corner, his voice lowered, yet not low enough. When the estate finally changes hands, he muttered, "Life will look very different for us." Us, he said. Not Evelyn and I, not my wife and me. Just us, a shadowy grouping that left me on the outside. I walked home from that dinner holding his arm, smiling at neighbors, nodding at acquaintances who called out greetings. But inside I was hollow. My mind replayed the sentence again and again. The estate. My grandfather's estate. The one I had received not as a gift of luxury, but as a legacy of family, blood, and history. Was I nothing more than a stepping stone for him to seize it? At night, when Alex turned away in bed, I stared at the ceiling. I remembered my grandfather's study, the smell of leather-bound books, the gleam of brass on his desk lamp, the firmness of his hand on my shoulder as he said, "This will one day be yours, Evelyn. Protect it." I wondered what he would think if he knew how casually my husband spoke of possession of entitlement. I told myself patience was the better weapon. Do not strike yet, I thought. Let him build the tower of lies higher. The higher the tower, the louder the crash when it falls. The next weeks carried on with that strained performance. Brunch with friends, polite smiles, meaningless chatter. Harper appeared more often than usual, always with a reason to reconnect, always laughing a little too brightly at Alex's stories. I could see the strings tying them together, invisible threads tightening with every shared glance. One evening, while washing dishes, I noticed Alex lingering in the doorway, phone in hand. His thumb danced quickly over the screen. I turned, suddenly catching his eyes. He forced a smile. Just checking tomorrow's schedule. He placed the phone face down on the counter and kissed my temple as if that could erase the suspicion. But I had already seen the reflection of the screen in the window glass. The name lighting it up was not a client or a colleague. It was Daniel. I'll tell you what came next soon. You'll want to hear it. The night it all unraveled began with nothing more than a gathering of old friends. Harper had invited us to her loft downtown, a wide-open space with tall windows and music that never quite settled into the background. Bottles of wine stood on the counter, and laughter rose from every corner. I went because declining would have raised questions, and I needed Alex to believe I was still blind. He thrived at parties like that. Alex was always most comfortable when he could hold a glass in one hand and the attention of half a room in the other. His voice carried confident, smooth the tone of a man certain he owned whatever space he entered. I stayed near the kitchen island, talking with a colleague I barely knew, but my ears were tuned elsewhere. As the night stretched on, the wine flowed more freely. Alex's laughter grew louder, his gestures wider. Harper, always eager for an audience, egged him on. And then amid the swell of voices, his words slipped free, drunk and thoughtless, but sharp enough to pierce. That estate, $2 million, can you imagine? Soon enough it will be mine. Life's about to change. The sentence echoed across the loft like a crack in glass. A few people chuckled nervously, mistaking it for a joke. Harper tried to shush him, her cheeks flushed red. But I stood frozen, the stem of my wineglass tight in my fingers. He had not just thought it. He had spoken it aloud, careless, arrogant, before witnesses. What he didn't know was that Harper had left her phone on the table recording a voice memo of the evening's chatter. She often did that, she said, to remember funny lines or ideas that came up. That night, the microphone caught his confession with perfect clarity. Later, when Harper absent-mindedly replayed it in the kitchen, I heard every word again, this time stripped of the haze of wine. There it was, undeniable, Alex calling my inheritance his own. I slipped away to the bathroom, closed the door, and pressed both hands to the sink. My reflection looked calm, composed, but inside my chest my heart beat like a drum. I felt anger, yes, but also something else. Confirmation. No longer whispers, no longer half-seen texts or sideways glances. Here was proof, a line spoken in his own voice. As if fate wanted to drive the point deeper, Harper's loft became the stage for one more humiliation. In the days that followed, she uploaded a casual Instagram story, a short clip of the party, Alex in the background, glass raised, boasting, "The estate will change everything." She hadn't realized what she captured. But the internet did. Within hours, the video spread across our circle of friends, cousins, even old classmates. Laughter-shocked emojis whispered, "Gossip," it all traveled faster than I could breathe. I scrolled through the comments late at night, my face lit only by the phone's glow. "So he married into money, huh?" one read. Another, "Imagine saying that with your wife standing there." Each word was a sting, but also a strange relief. The humiliation was no longer mine alone to carry. That week, I watched Alex try to bury the incident under charm and denial. He told me people had misunderstood, that he had been joking, that too much wine had loosened his tongue. He promised it meant nothing. But I knew better. Drunken words, they say, are sober thoughts, and these thoughts had been fermenting for years. What Alex could not see was that every denial, every excuse only added weight to the rope he had tied around himself. I kept my silence, saved the memo, bookmarked the viral clip. The tower was rising, and I would not stop it. I'll tell you what happened at the funeral when all masks finally fell, but that's for the next chapter. The funeral was held on a gray morning, the kind that feels designed for grief. My grandfather had been gone for nearly a week by then, and though I had already cried in private, the ceremony itself passed with a quiet numbness. Black coats, folded programs, the scent of lilies heavy in the chapel, each detail blurred together. I stood near the casket as old neighbors offered condolences, their voices gentle, their hands warm on mine. Alex stood beside me, polished as ever, whispering polite thanks to anyone who glanced his way. If there was guilt inside him, it never reached his face. He placed a hand on my back, guiding me through the procession, the image of a dutiful husband. To those around us, we looked united in sorrow. Only I knew how deep the fracture ran. After the burial, the family gathered at my grandfather's house. The air inside carried his memory, leather chairs, shelves of books, the faint smell of pipe tobacco still clinging to the curtains. A large dining table had been cleared for documents. The lawyer was expected soon, but in the meantime, my relatives whispered over coffee and sandwiches, voices thick with anticipation. I clutched a folder against my chest. Inside were the papers my grandfather had prepared: the trust, deed, the will, the notary's stamp, pressed clean on every page. They felt heavier than any object I had ever carried, not because of the paper itself, but because of what it represented. Legacy, security, responsibility. When the lawyer finally arrived, the room quieted. Chairs scraped as we gathered around the table. Alex took the seat beside me, his hand brushing mine with calculated intimacy. Then, with the boldness of a man convinced of his entitlement, he spoke before the lawyer could even begin. A portion of the estate, Alex declared, his voice firm, belongs to me as Evelyn's husband. By law, half of the $2 million, including the property, is marital asset. I have a right to it. The room shifted. Eyes darted from him to me. My aunt coughed, someone's spoon clattered against a cup. For a moment, all I heard was the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. I did not answer him. Instead, I placed the folder gently on the table, sliding it toward the lawyer. The embossed cover caught the light, and I watched Alex's confident smile falter. He had expected resistance, perhaps, but not preparation. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, opening the folder with deliberate care. He skimmed the first page, then nodded slowly. "We'll address all claims in order," he said. His calm tone only heightened the tension. My cousins leaned forward, curiosity burning. My mother pressed a tissue to her lips. Alex shifted in his chair, tapping his foot under the table. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the lawyer's movements. In that moment, I felt no urge to argue. The truth was already written, sealed, and stamped. All I needed was patience. Let Alex speak. Let him bear his greed before every relative gathered. The higher his voice rose, the more obvious his hunger became. And still he did not see it. He believed his performance, convincing his claim undeniable. He did not know that his tower of arrogance had already been hollowed from the inside. What he didn't know was that the lawyer arriving through that doorway was not just any professional. He was Daniel, the man Alex had mocked me, for the man he once claimed I would always choose if given the chance. My past standing ready to expose his present. I will tell you what Daniel said and how the room fell silent when the words were read. But that comes in the next chapter. When the door opened again, the room stirred. Coats rustled, chairs squeaked, and whispers rippled like a breeze through dry leaves. At first, Alex leaned back in his chair with the smugness of a man who believed he already controlled the narrative. But the moment the lawyer stepped inside, his expression shifted. It was Daniel, the same Daniel my husband had mocked by name at the wedding, the man Alex had called a better choice than me. Time had added a few lines to his face, a touch of silver at his temples, but his presence filled the room with the kind of calm authority only earned through years of navigating boardrooms and courtrooms. "Good afternoon," Daniel said, his voice measured. He set his leather case on the table, snapping it open with practiced ease. Papers stamped and bound rested inside. "Let's review the terms of the trust established by the late Mr. Caldwell." Alex shifted uncomfortably. His earlier declaration that half of the estate belonged to him still hung in the air like smoke, but Daniel did not even glance his way. Instead, he pulled out a thick document, the deed folded neatly within, embossed with the notary's seal. The estate, valued at $2 million, Daniel began, was placed into a trust 10 years ago. The trust specifies sole ownership by Evelyn Caldwell. This property and its assets are not and never were considered marital property. They are immune from division in any marital dissolution. The words landed like stones dropped into water. Silence followed, rippling outward. My aunt gasped softly. My mother's tissue crumpled in her hand. Across the table, Alex's face drained of color. "That cannot be right," Alex snapped, his voice cracking louder than he intended. "We're married. By law, what's hers is mine. Half of that estate belongs to me." Daniel finally lifted his eyes to him, calm, steady, unblinking. "Not in this case. The trust was written explicitly to protect the inheritance from marital claims. Your name does not appear anywhere within these documents. The estate is Evelyn's and Evelyn's alone. It was not just a legal statement, it was a verdict." My husband's jaw worked soundlessly like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. He looked around the table, perhaps hoping someone would rally to his side. But all he saw were the faces of family wide-eyed judgmental, unwilling to defend his greed, now that the truth had been laid bare. And then Daniel, my ex, added something that made the room still tighter with tension. He turned back to me, his expression softening in a way I had not seen in years. "We both know," he said gently, "this isn't only about money. It is about trust." The double meaning was not lost on anyone present. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my chin high. Alex's glare burned into me, but I did not return it. My focus was on the document spread across the table, the final line of my grandfather's signature reminding me of his faith. Around us, the relatives began to murmur their voices like a chorus of quiet judgments. Harper, who had trailed Alex into this mess, sank into her chair staring at the floor. Alex tried one last desperate plea. "Evelyn, you know I've supported you. I stood by you. Surely you don't intend to shut me out of everything." But he had already shut himself out with every whisper, every careless boast, every betrayal made public. What he didn't know was that the papers were only the first card I would play. I had more evidence, more truth waiting to surface, and when it did, his last shred of dignity would crumble. I'll tell you about that revelation in the next chapter. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The evidence was already louder than any argument I could make. The trust deed lay open for all to see. Daniel's calm words had stripped Alex of his claims, and yet the room buzzed with an energy that demanded resolution. I stood slowly, the folder still beneath my hand. "This estate," I said steady and clear, "is not a prize to be fought over. It is a legacy. My grandfather entrusted it to me, and I will honor that trust." My eyes swept across the table, landing on each relative, in turn, then finally on Alex. What hurts most is not the legal fight, it is the betrayal. Gasps rippled across the room. Alex shifted in his chair, his jaw tight, but before he could launch into another denial, I reached for my phone. "Since you claim I misunderstand you," I continued, "let us hear your own words." I tapped the screen, and Harper's voice memo filled the room. Alex's drunken drawl clear as day, declaring, "That estate, $2 million. Soon enough it will be mine." The sound hung in the air like smoke. Chairs creaked as relatives leaned closer, eyes wide. My mother covered her mouth. My cousins exchanged whispers. Alex bolted upright. "That was a joke," he barked. "You all know how parties are—" But before he could finish, another sound. Joined the faint background noise of laughter glasses clinking and his voice again. "Life's about to change once I get my hands on it." The recording ended. Silence pressed down on us. Then from the corner, someone muttered, "Shameless." Alex's face reddened, but the humiliation was only beginning. I opened Instagram and turned my screen outward. Harper's viral clip, the one she hadn't realized, captured him played in an endless loop. There he was, glass raised high, crowing about the estate as if I did not exist. Hundreds of comments scrolled beneath, mocking him, condemning him. I set the phone flat on the table. "The whole world has seen what you think of me. This isn't just a family matter anymore. It is public." The weight of those words seemed to crush him. For years, Alex had thrived on appearances, on the illusion of success and charm. Now that illusion had shattered not in secret, but in front of friends, family, and strangers alike. His voice faltered. "Evelyn, please, this is getting out of hand." But I had no intention of softening. "Out of hand. You made it public, Alex. You chose the stage. I am only letting the curtain rise." Around the table, no one moved to defend him. Harper shrank further into her chair, cheeks pale. Daniel remained calm, watching with quiet intensity. My relatives sat stiff, their silence, its own form of judgment. And still, Alex didn't know I had one more card to play. Something beyond a careless boast or a drunken confession. Something in black and white, undeniable. "I'll show you in a moment," I said, my voice low. "The proof you can't laugh away." The room held its breath, waiting for the blow. I had promised them proof, and I meant to deliver it. My hand moved slowly, deliberately, as I drew a second folder from my bag. This one was thinner, but its contents carried the kind of weight no denial could lift. "I debated whether to share this," I said, my eyes fixed on Alex. "But since you've insisted this is all a misunderstanding, perhaps the family deserves clarity." I slid the printed pages across the table. Email correspondence. Dates times subject lines. The kind of record that cannot be erased with charm or excuses. Daniel, ever the professional, picked up the top sheet and read aloud. "Proposed sale of Caldwell Estate. Estimated value $2 million. Funds to be transferred to private account upon finalization. Confidential. He set the page down carefully. His gaze met Alex's. This is your email. Alex's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. That isn't mine. Anyone could have. Stop. My voice cut through his stammering. The account listed is yours. The date is last month. You were already planning to sell what you didn't even own. The relatives erupted in low murmurs, their judgment no longer whispered but spoken plainly. My aunt leaned toward her husband, shaking her head. My mother's lips tightened into a thin, trembling line. Cousins exchanged looks of disbelief. The air grew hot-heavy with condemnation. Alex tried to gather himself. He slammed a palm on the table. You don't understand. I was protecting us our future. Do you think $2 million should just sit there? I was making plans. Smart plans for both of us. Both of us, I repeated, my voice steady but cold. You mean for yourself and Harper. The emails mention her name too, in case you've forgotten. Joint account, it says. New start. Gasps burst around the table. Harper went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. She muttered something about not meaning for it to go this far, but the words fell useless into the heavy silence. Alex sank back into his chair, defeated. The bravado drained from him. What remained was a hollow man, exposed, stripped of dignity. His reputation, his alliances, even his marriage, all crumbled in the span of minutes. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I simply gathered the documents back into my folder, each page sliding into place with quiet finality. You thought I was just a vault, I said softly. But a vault can lock, and it just did. No one spoke after that. Even Daniel, who might have added some closing words of law, remained silent. The truth was already carved into the air. What Alex didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that my decision was already made. Divorce was not a question anymore. It was a matter of timing. The estate would remain untouched, my grandfather's legacy intact. But Alex, he would be left to rot in the ruins of his own greed. I'll tell you how I chose to end it in the final chapter. The meeting ended in silence. Papers had been gathered, chairs scraped back, relatives shuffled out into the cold air, still murmuring their disbelief. Daniel stayed a moment longer, offering a brief nod, professional steady, with the faintest trace of something personal lingering in his eyes. Then he too was gone, leaving me alone with Alex, in a house that no longer belonged to him, in a marriage that no longer had substance. He stood by the window, his reflection blurred in the glass. Evelyn, he said, voice low, broken, we can fix this. I made mistakes, yes, but we can still... I lifted my hand. Stop. My voice was calm, not cruel, but final. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Every text, every boast, every plan to sell what was never yours, those were choices. And choices have consequences. He turned toward me, but I no longer saw the husband I once loved. I saw only a man who had traded trust for greed, respect for arrogance, and dignity for exposure. Whatever bond we once shared had been burned to ash. I will be filing for divorce, I said. The estate is protected, my grandfather's legacy remains with me, and your words, your own words, have already told the world who you are. There is nothing left to discuss. For a moment he seemed ready to fight again, but the strength had left him. His shoulders slumped, his eyes fell, and the room swallowed his silence. I walked past him, folder in hand, and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The sky was streaked with the fading light of sunset, a deep orange spilling across the horizon. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the clean, sharp air of freedom. As I walked down the steps, my mother caught my arm. She searched my face, then whispered, "Your grandfather would be proud." I smiled faintly. I hope so. Outside, the murmurs of family still carried whispers about betrayal, about greed, about justice done. They would talk for weeks, maybe months, retelling the story of how Alex lost everything in one afternoon. And perhaps that was justice enough. But for me, the story was not about his ruin. It was about survival. It was about remembering that dignity is not something others can grant. It is something you protect even when those closest to you try to steal it. I left the house that night with my head high, the folder clutched against my chest, and a sense of closure I had not felt in years. The estate was mine. My freedom was mine. My future finally, wholly, undeniably was mine. If you think Evelyn made the right move, comment right. If you have a better way to deal with betrayal, share your idea.